What's up everyone, Master Fox here today, and I want to talk to you guys about a game mechanic change that occurred before that I think has changed the scope of the game a lot. As I'm sure all of you know, there was a rule change a while back meant to adjust for first turn advantage by removing the ability to draw on the first turn for the first player. Drawing on the first turn had always been a big gripe in many players' eyes, and so this was meant to alleviate the fact that the first player is able to act first, being able to freely set up their board uninterrupted along with all the other advantages that went along with going first. Basically, nearly every deck wanted to go first if you won the die roll. With the removal of the draw rule though, the first player now starts with 5 cards instead of 6, and the second player gets the draw, giving them 6 cards in their turn. This makes for a more interesting dynamic in choosing who goes first and who goes second, as now there's a dichotomy of decks that want to go first versus other decks that want to go second. However, I think this has almost led to a 180-degree turnaround, as more decks want to go second now for the extra card and the battle phase. But that discussion is for another day. It's an interesting topic for sure, but what I wanted to address here is how the draw rule change has affected the mindset in deck building. I believe it has led to a second problem. The problem, rather than being first turn advantage, is now something I call a required turn 1+1 play. What is this you're talking about, Master Fox, you guys may ask? Well, allow me to explain. It seems like decks now need to be able to have plays going first as well as going second, just to cover both their options. To even think about having a chance to compete in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, they need to be able to play well going first as well as going second. As it stands now, the majority of decks already prefer going second, so it's going first that needs a power-up play in order to boost these decks up to a competitive level. And that's where the +1 comes in. In order to make up for the extra card your opponent gets in going second, you need to have a +1 play on your first turn. Otherwise, you may be looking at a large card advantage differential. Let's take a look at every single competitive deck that we've had recently as well as now. A lot of this is done based on my analysis of previous competitive formats, but the logic still stands even up to today. Nekroz as a deck had a bunch of turn 1+1 plays. They had Manju and Senju mainly, but they also had Kaleidoscope and Unicorn plays, which got them pluses in their searching. Shadal's had Mathematician, which now is unfortunately at 1, but they had a plethora of other cards that allowed them to plus as well. Clifforts obviously had Scout, Teller Knights have their Deneb, Burning Abyss had Tour Guide, and basically any of their monsters if they summon a Dante and mill into a Graph or a Seer or anything like that. And then fast forward to the current meta, we see Magispectors having basically every single monster in their deck being a turn 1+1. And then Pepe has a bunch of cards like this as well. Their pendulums all are basically a +1 when they pop them and they go back into the extra deck. You can just summon them back anyways. So even though it's not truly a +1 in terms of card advantage because the extra deck isn't technically card advantage, it basically is because once you get your scale set up, they turn into a free resource. And then Cosmos are the only deck that doesn't really have this inherently, but cards like Farm Girl, Cosmo Town, and the floating of all the ships basically compensates for this disadvantage. Even decks that are tier 2 or rogue need this +1 play to even think about being able to battle against the big boys. Look at decks like Hero with Shadow Mist, Volcanics with Volcanic Rocket, Ritual Beast with their Ulti Canahawk plays. It's only Infernoids that are one of the few decks that don't really fit this, but they're a different beast because they have a different mindset, as their advantage technically can come from the grave as well. So milling off of reasoning, even though technically it can be a +0 or a -1, it technically gets some pluses if you get good mills. But anyways, let's return to the topic of discussion. I think that this new draw rule has been overall very good for the game. However, as with any rule change, it obviously presents with its own unique problems. And here we see one of them. Decks that can't generate that turn 1+1 are put at a severe disadvantage due to the draw rule compared to decks that can. I'm looking at decks like Six Samurai, for example. This makes the meta very hostile to decks that can't generate this sort of advantage, or decks that can't make up for it in some other way, as Infernoids can. Most often, the only way to make up for this disadvantage is by using a ton of traps or making the deck purely offensive and an OTK machine. This makes for a meta comprised of the decks today that can plus, with little else to be seen. Decks like Mermail and Firefist, which may be a bit below the metagame's power level, are severely hampered by the lack of a solid turn 1 play. Mermails will get a lot better once they get their +1 play via Neptune Abyss. They did use Undine in the past, but Undine was kind of a bulky engine and it wasn't very good. Firefist had the Holy Fire combo with Horse Prince and Rooster, but that combo is not really ideally performed turn 1. It's not really a safe move since you're throwing everything you have onto the board. Even though Exciton Knight is gone now, the Holy Fire combo is kind of lackluster. Basically, my point is, with the change in the draw rule, decks seem to all need a turn 1 +1 play now just to keep up in terms of advantage, because technically going first means you're starting at a -1, so you have to recuperate that advantage somehow, and that's obviously through a card like Deneb or anything that can plus on your first turn so that you can recoup that advantage, because your opponent is probably going to be able to respond with some play like that as well. And if you think about it, if you don't have a way to plus on your first turn and your opponent does going second, you're at a -2 already right off the bat. And in terms of card advantage, that's not good at all for you. Anyways, these were just my thoughts on how the draw rule has changed the dynamic of the first turn. Tell me what you guys think in the comments section below. Give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you.